So I don't want to skip over anybody else, but I want to bring Nick in and appreciate his time. Let me give you a little background. Nick and I have only conversed a few times, but I was so impressed by the presentation which he and his mentor colleague gave to us a few weeks ago. And Nick, I'll let you fill in a little bit more about that. Nick is a PhD student at FIU, Florida International University, and I'll let you fill in the right kind of details. But some of the correlation between our stories here and what Nick's going to share and what my family with Eddie come from. Let me put some pieces together. My husband, Eddie, professionally for over 50 years, fished for bonefish in the Florida Keys, in this area in South Florida. That was his profession. And bonefish are a very specialized sport fish. It's all release. He specialized in fly fishing, very high tech. And I'll let Nick fill in a little bit more about that. But so one piece of this story is bonefish, and that speaks very strongly to the Whiteman family. Another piece of this conversation, of course, has to do with looking at the environment, looking at those of us here tonight have a common bond of having connected with the Shackley Company for various reasons. But one of the things that is a common bond for us is a commitment to being in harmony with nature, to using environmentally friendly products, making sure that that's a part of what we stand for. And so there's that piece. And then there's the third piece that Nick's going to bring in. And that is this whole thing, which I'll let you fill in the blanks, Nick, but the research project which he and one of his colleague mentors did, which I'll let you fill in, because I think it's I don't want to say any more, except that you will understand why I think this is such a powerful story. And the bottom line for all of us here business-wise is the word why. Why in the world do we do what we do? Well, a part of the reason we do what we do is to be able to educate people about some of the things that Nick will share. So with that introduction, Nick, thank you so much for taking a special evening and being with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was probably the best intro I've ever had. Good thing this is recorded to show this around. That was a good one. Good to meet everybody here briefly. About a couple of you guys, really neat that we're chatting across the country right now. And it's pretty cool. I didn't expect that, but that's the advent of everyone being remote these days. So as she mentioned, my name's Nick. So I'm from Florida. I grew up in Southwest Florida and fishing the Keys. So right now I'm a PhD candidate at FIU. And so I study fish ecology and ecotoxicology, so contaminants in the environment. I'm also a fishing guide in the Florida Keys as well. So trying to catch bonefish without 50 years of experience, and it's going okay. But let me show you guys some about our research. So let me see here. I'm gonna go ahead and share screens. So this is me with a bonefish. If anyone hasn't seen a bonefish before, this is one of many photos that you will see during this presentation. So I work with Florida International University and the Bonefish and Tarpon Trust. And Bonefish and Tarpon Trust is a non-for-profit that works on protecting bonefish, tarpon, permit, and all of the habitats that support those fisheries and just coastal fisheries in general. And so my topic is the pharmaceutical threats to coastal habitats and fisheries. So realistically, the entire lens of this talk and my research is that of an aspect of water quality. And it's incredibly important for us here as Floridians. And we're speaking with people right now throughout the country. And I imagine you don't have Florida's coast, but you have plenty of water resources, I'm sure, that are very important, whether it be drinking water, whether it be for recreation, lakes, who knows what. But it's a very important thing for not just Floridians here. In Florida, recreational fishing has the highest economic impact in the United States. We have the most anglers and the best quality of fishing. So Florida leads the United States, as I mentioned, economic impact. The number of anglers, 36% of them are from the United States with 22 million fishing trips. And we have 15% of the world records. So we'll focus on South Florida, which is where I did my study on bonefish. And Florida Keys fishing is 837 million a year, and about 20% of everyone coming to the Keys is doing so to go fish. And then 60%, oh, excuse me, that's 20% of dollars, 60% of the tourists going to the Keys are there to fish. And in Florida Bay, so the Everglades, it's 439, and there's about 264,000 anglers annually. So quite a few people fishing and relying on the water quality. So aside from that, money is one thing, but a lot of us are here likely because not money when it comes to the environment, but more so identity, culture, and again, the economy. So when I think of water quality, I think of things that are visible. So you have an algae bloom, you could have runoff from construction. That list goes on. And what you see in the top right is Sanibel Island after releases from the Okeechobee Lake through the Caloosahatchee River. But then there's a new and emerging, what I would call invisible threat. So something that's not readily visible or apparent in the water, but it still is something of concern. And in our case, those are pharmaceuticals. So there's about 5,000 prescription medications. There are 300,000 or so over-the-counter medications. Those are less regulated, so data on that is a little bit harder to come by. But they're more than just drugs that we take. Unfortunately, they eventually can reach the aquatic environment and put these aquatic environments at risk. So in the United States, we love our drugs. We, as an American, an individual consumes about 18 30-day prescriptions a year, and that equates to 6.3 billion.
Wait a minute, stop. Say that again, please.
So both these figures are crazy, right? So 18 30-day prescriptions per person per year. And we're the best, 50% of world consumption of pharmaceuticals. So we're winning. We have 6.3 billion prescriptions 2020. That's $400 billion. And then we'll highlight Florida. That's third in the nation for prescriptions. So we love our drugs. Now, to put pharmaceutical production and consumption in relation to three other environmental things that we really understand and care about: atmospheric CO2, population, and chemical industry, the proportional change since 1970 far outpacing that of those other aforementioned environmental things. So the rate of production and release is significantly outpacing our ability to understand what it's doing to the environment and assess the safety. So to further extend that, we're exceeding the safe operating space for these novel entities. So we've gone beyond the operating space that is safe without an ability to understand what is exactly happening and how can we control it. Now, I mentioned that pharmaceuticals are pollutants, but how does this happen? So you take a drug, and let's say maybe 50% of it is excreted. In some cases, it's much less. In many cases, it's much more. And so once you excrete that drug, let's say has in Florida 2 different pathways, either a septic system, and 1/3 of households are on septic. And that could be leaky, it could be failing, it could be old, not monitored, and then that inevitably could leak into a canal. And then 2/3 of homes are on sewer systems. These sewer systems could be very old. Some of ours in South Florida from the 60s, 50s. There could be leaks. And let's say it does make it through to wastewater treatment plants. They weren't designed to remove pharmaceuticals. This wasn't something in mind when we put these wastewater treatment plants into action. This is something that's new. So they do pass through untreated. And does it reach our coastal waters? So we down here have 4 different, let's say, outlets for that wastewater. It could be ocean outfall. And we have quite a bit of that in Miami-Dade County. There's deep well injection, so that's about 1,800 to 3,000 feet. And then shallow well, which is just below the surface, oftentimes like 60 feet or so. Then there's reclaimed water, reused water that's not fully treated, so we're not supposed to drink that. And these all can contain drugs, because let's think about they're all coming from the same source that's not able to remove them. So we inject the largest volume in the United States of deep well injection, and we presume that there's confinement, but there's no monitoring and the fate is unknown. And at the injection depth, there's evidence of connectivity with the Florida Straits. So if you go from where the Florida Straits are, so let's say where that plate is, the drop off, at that level, it's like, I don't know, like 2,000 feet deep, has the same water signature as the water in our aquifers where the water is being injected. So that suggests connectivity from where we're injecting our wastewater to the ocean. And in Florida, it sounds 3,000 feet as far. It realistically isn't. That could be within 10, 5, whatever miles, very close to the coast. In Key West, all of the water, for the most part, deep well injection, and in Marathon. So then in Marathon, we have shallow well injection, and there's high connectivity between the surface and the injected waters. One study found that the water that's injected can reach the surface at about 75 feet per hour. So that realistically could be water that's injected is back to the surface within 1 hour. And the idea being there is like, okay, if it's injected and then let's say it is leaching back to the surface, that would be treated, but 1 hour is not a lot of time for things to be removed. So they reach our waters and they inevitably can become contaminants there. Now, 4 things to think about with drugs is that there could be a persistent and constant supply if they are continuously being introduced into the environment. We don't have regulations for disposal or allowable amounts in the environment. And drugs, we might be finding them at very low concentrations, but they're designed to have an effect at a low dose. You just think about, you don't want to eat a bucket full of pills to actually have something happen. So the drugs are designed to do something at very small concentrations. And these are human drugs. You might be like, well, what does it matter to these animals, particularly fish that I study? Fish, interestingly enough, share about 70% of the same drug targets that human drugs are designed to actually interact with. So they have the machinery for something actually to happen. Now they have effects on fish and they can affect all aspects of life. So it's not killing them, but it's altering their behaviors. And these behaviors are very important because they affect survival, reproduction, and the health of a population. Now, antidepressants are the best studied. We study with researchers from Sweden. And so as a fish exposed to an antidepressant has an increase in activity and feeding, decreases in sociability, an increase in boldness, so they take more risks, and their movement rates increase, so they migrate faster, and it all one way or the other leads to lower survival rates. So here's a figure of a study in a lake where perch were either exposed or not exposed in the lab to an anti-anxiety drug and then placed in a lake with a predator. And they were affixed with acoustic tracking devices. So we'll pay attention mostly to that upper left one, the figure of the lake there. So in a moment, they're going to be released. Red are those fish that were exposed. Yellow are the ones that were not. And what's going to happen? All right, so they introduce them there. And you're going to see these red ones start venturing off. So they don't have the same inclination to school when in the presence of a predator, and even outside the presence of a predator, they're not behaving in a safe manner. They're taking more risks, and we just had one dot disappear, so they are getting predated on more frequently. And so this is sped up. You'll see those yellow ones still stay near the area where they were released, and these red ones are just going all over the lake. So they are being eaten much more frequently than the yellow unexposed fish. Now, to focus on my study, we looked at bonefish, so Beulah vulpes, and we wanted to understand by looking at these fish if pharmaceuticals are a concern for fisheries in South Florida. So bonefish, we have 12 different species, 3 in the Caribbean. They reach about 21 years old, so pretty long-lived fish, spawn between November and May. They live in nearshore seagrass habitats and feed on benthic organisms, so shrimp, crabs, toadfish. So this means that they're in close proximity to people and they're eating organisms that are slow moving and slow growing, not necessarily slow growing, excuse me, but they are remaining in those same areas. Let's see here. Now, Carolyn didn't go into this, but the population of bonefish has decreased dramatically. So these are tournament catch records, and you see that dramatic decrease and then an increase in recent years. So there has been a resurgence in bonefish, but these are of a different size than what we historically find. The recent recovery is encouraging, but what is still troubling is the fact that we don't understand why they disappeared in the first place. So if we, let's say we go to a contaminated lake or seagrass flat and replace all that seagrass that died off, without resolving the issue, that seagrass is just going to die again. So if you don't understand why they disappeared, then there's the fear that they will disappear again. So research and exposure on effects of pharmaceuticals is focused on freshwater systems and rivers. And here's a whole survey of pharmaceuticals throughout the Danube Basin. And for us, we're looking, okay, are they concerned for South Florida fisheries? We asked 4 questions. The first one, are they a problem? And to do this, we sampled 93 bonefish throughout South Florida and analyzed them for 104 different types of drugs. We understand if it's a problem everywhere. So we looked at 5 different regions, and these are from Biscayne Bay through the Dry Tortugas. So very urban to up to about 70 miles from the nearest urban center in the Dry Tortugas. We understand how big of a problem. So we took this concept of the therapeutic plasma level. So when you're prescribed a drug, it needs to reach a certain concentration in your bloodstream to actually do something. So we took 1/3 of that threshold and used that as our point of comparison to the concentrations that we're finding to understand, is it actually doing anything? Then we want to understand how they're being exposed. So we look at their food items, mud crabs, pink shrimp, toadfish. In our findings, some more pretty pictures. So are they a problem? Yes. Every single bonefish had a drug. The average was 7. We found 58 different kinds, with the most being blood pressure, antidepressants, and prostate medications. And the effects of having more than one drug is difficult to ascertain. So it's the same reason why your doctor would ask, what else are you taking? I need to know if there's going to be any interactions. And that's what could be happening to these bonefish when they have numerous different types of drugs. Now, is the problem everywhere? Yes. So there were some regional differences, and what was most surprising is that we found it high in both urban and remote areas. So there's previous literature that shows that, okay, it can be detected in offshore areas, cool, but also in remote areas that are heavily impacted by tourism. So in alpine rivers that are very far from urban areas, tourism had a very high impact on the number of pharmaceuticals that were detected there. So that's our suspicion with dry tortugas. Now, is the problem everywhere? So if you look at these dots, each one is one of the regions, and the circles show the percent similarity of their distance to the centroid, which is the center of the distribution. And that's just showing basically that all of the fish from Biscayne Bay are fairly similar to dry tortugas. Those two are similar to lower keys, and Key West and upper keys are just completely different. So the similarity between these areas seems to be independent of proximity to people. How big of a problem? It's a big one. 56% of the fish had at least one drug that exceeded that threshold. The most ones that exceeded were heart medications, antihistamines, antidepressants. And again, the dry tortugas topped all of them with 93% of fish having an exceedance, which again is surprising. We also looked at the Caribbean. So we found that remote areas, these areas, Bahamas, Belize, Mexico, they also did have high exceedances and numbers of pharmaceuticals. So it's not just isolated to very urbanized areas. This is one fish from Key West that had 16 different drugs in it. So it had 8 different antidepressants that were 10 to 300 times the level that you should have in your bloodstream. Schizophrenia, antidepressant medications, heart medications, and the list kind of goes on from there. Antihistamine, antifungal, stomach, and an opioid codeine. Now, is food a pathway? And it proves that it is a likely pathway of exposure. So you can be exposed through inhalation, water, sediment, or food. And we found almost twice the number of pharmaceuticals in each prey item. So 11 in one prey item versus 7 as the average in bonefish. And there were 3 prey items with 24 different drugs in just that one prey item. So it's quite a few drugs in a single little prey. So they're present in all prey types tested and the same types of pharmaceuticals as in bonefish. So the pharmaceutical threat is real. We found that there's high exposure in bonefish with likely effects. Exposure is far and near from pollution sources. And the fact that exposure is in the prey means it's not just a bonefish problem, but all inshore fisheries because they feed on the same prey items. So a lot of this is depressing, and I catch myself sometimes potentially ending on a negative note. But the fact of the matter is that in this situation, and with many situations when it comes to the environment, is that ignorance is not bliss. The fact that we know means that we have the ability to change it. So there are ways to fix it. There are additional steps in wastewater treatment that you can add that remove pharmaceuticals that are being used in Sweden and Switzerland, with ozonation being the most cost effective. And we need to make sure that our water can be cleaned and reused. It's much more valuable to us to actually be used when we think about the Everglades that needs water, Biscayne Bay that needs water, rather than ocean outfall or deep well injection. If it were to be cleaned and reused, then it's much more valuable. So rethinking wastewater, as I mentioned, damaging and too valuable, needs to become a safe source of energy, fertilizer, and water. And for Florida, at the very least, we have a very timely situation in that we have a bill that has been put in place and they're allocating funding for clean water. So it's a Clean Waterways Act. And hopefully that this is something that they take in consideration when allocating priorities for cleaning our waterways. So with that, I want to thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate you guys having me here.
Well, thanks, Nick. You and I will
Yeah, have a
stay in touch.
great evening, everybody, and we'll be in touch.